The courtyard is full of bones. Horses, cattle, pigs, a dog. More than 50 animals in total, arranged with a precision that rules out slaughter for food. Some of the horses have their hooves crossed, placed deliberately, symmetrically, as though posed in death by people who understood that what they were doing would outlast them, even if they themselves would not. Nearby, the remains of a man lie in a separate chamber. Whether he too was part of the offering is a question that still has no definitive answer. Above the bones, above the courtyard, above the massive stone staircase, and the walls still bright with traces of red paint, there is 14 feet of packed earth and clay. Someone buried all of it. Someone held the feast, killed the animals, set the building on fire, and then spent days filling it in with dirt, entombing everything beneath a mound that would sit undisturbed in the Spanish countryside for 25 centuries. Then those people walked away, and no one knows where they went. This is not a myth. This is an archaeological site called Casas del Toruñuelo, located in the Extremadura region of southwestern Spain, inland from Seville, far from the coast. It was first surveyed in 2014 and has been under excavation since 2015. Less than a quarter of it has been uncovered. What has emerged so far? Monumental architecture, imported Greek marble, bronze cauldrons, ceramics from across the Mediterranean, a drainage system, a lime mortar construction technique, previously attributed only to the Romans at a later date, belongs to a civilization that most people have never heard of. A civilization that the ancient Greeks considered legendary in its own time. A civilization whose name appears in Herodotus and in Aristotle, in the Hebrew Bible and in Assyrian inscriptions, yet whose capital city has never been found, whose language remains largely undeciphered, and whose end is one of the most quietly unsettling disappearances in the ancient world. The civilization is called Tartessos. It emerged around the 9th century BC in what is now Andalusia, the southernmost region of Spain, centered along the Guadalquivir River and the mineral-rich lands surrounding the modern provinces of Huelva, Cádiz, and Seville. Its people were metallurgists and traders. The ground beneath their feet held copper, tin, lead, silver, and gold. Enormous deposits running through the Iberian Pyrite Belt, one of the richest mineral veins in the ancient Mediterranean. By the late Bronze Age, silver extraction in the region of Huelva had reached what archaeologists describe as industrial scale. The slag heaps left behind by smelting operations at Rio Tinto, near the Tartessian heartland, contained an estimated 15 million tons of pyrometallurgical residue. The Phoenicians, sailing westward from Tyre and Sidon, established their colony of Gadir, modern Cádiz, on the coast nearby, specifically to trade with the Tartessians. The relationship between the two cultures produced what scholars call a hybrid archaeological culture, a mingling of local Iberian traditions with Phoenician techniques, religious practices, architectural styles that defined Tartessian material identity for roughly 400 years. The Greeks knew about them too. Herodotus tells the story of a group of Phocaean sailors from Asia Minor who reached the far end of the Mediterranean and arrived at Tartessos, where they were welcomed by a king named Arganthonios. The name itself may derive from a Celtic or Proto-Celtic word for silver. According to Herodotus, Arganthonios ruled for 80 years and lived to be 120. Numbers almost certainly exaggerated, but numbers that reflect the deep impression Tartessos made on the Greek imagination. The king, Herodotus writes, was so taken with the Phocaeans that he invited them to leave their homeland and settle in his territory. When they declined, he gave them money to build a wall around their city of Phocaea to defend against the advancing Persians. The historian Ephorus, writing in the 4th century BC, described Tartessos as a very prosperous market, with much tin carried by river, as well as gold and copper from Celtic lands. The poet Stesichorus mentioned it. Pausanias mentioned it. Bronze from Tartessos was said to have been used in a treasury at Olympia, built to commemorate a chariot victory. This was not an obscure settlement. This was, by every surviving account, a wealthy and sophisticated maritime culture. the first in the Western Mediterranean to be recognized by the Greek-speaking world as a kingdom. Its traders moved goods as far as present-day Israel, Greece, and Egypt. Its artisans produced intricate goldwork, pear-shaped jugs, shallow braziers with loop handles, incense burners ornamented with floral motifs, fibulae, belt buckles. Its potters developed distinctive wares, pattern-varnished ceramics, geometrically banded pieces that archaeologists call carambolo ware. After the site near Seville, where a famous cache of 21 gold objects was discovered in 1958 by construction workers who stumbled into one of the most significant finds in Iberian prehistory. Yet there is something missing at the center of all this evidence. The capital city, the harbor that gave the civilization its name, has never been located. Pausanias, writing in the 2nd century AD, placed it between two mouths of a river he said was called the Tartessus, which he identified with the Baetis, the Roman name for the Guadalquivir. The German archaeologist Adolf Scholten, who published the first major modern study of Tartessus in 1922, believed the city lay beneath the shifting wetlands of the Guadalquivir Delta, an area now protected as the Doñana National Park. The river, over millennia, deposited sediment that sealed off its old channels. A sandbar stretching from the mouth of the Rio Tinto near Palos de la Frontera to Almonte gradually closed the ancient estuary. If a city once sat at the mouth of the river, it could be buried beneath meters of marsh and silt inaccessible to conventional excavation. Scholten dug there in the 1920s and found nothing conclusive. Others have followed with satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar. The results remain ambiguous. The heart of Tartessos, if it still exists in any physical form, may be sealed beneath one of Europe's most ecologically sensitive landscapes. What we have instead are the edges, peripheral sites, inland settlements, necropolises. From these fragments, a story has assembled itself. Not a complete story, but a coherent one, at least up to the point where it stops making sense. The trail of artifacts, of trade ceramics, of silver slag, of inscriptions in the still undeciphered southwestern script, the oldest known indigenous writing system on the Iberian Peninsula, with roughly 97 surviving inscriptions, runs from the 9th century BC through to about the 5th century BC. And then it ends. Not gradually, not through a visible transition from one culture to another, the record simply thins and falls silent. Most Tartessian sites were, in the words of one summary, inexplicably abandoned in the 5th century BC. The question of why has produced several theories, none of them entirely satisfying. One hypothesis points to Carthage. After the fall of Tyre to the Babylonians in the 6th century BC, the Phoenician colony of Carthage in North Africa rose to become the dominant naval power in the Western Mediterranean. Carthage sought to control maritime trade routes and may have imposed a blockade or launched military action against competitors. If Tartessos depended on seaborne trade, and it clearly did, a Carthaginian stranglehold on the Strait of Gibraltar would have been devastating. There is some circumstantial evidence for this. Greek access to Tartessos seems to have ended abruptly around this period. The Phocian trade networks that once reached the far west contracted eastward, but there is no archaeological evidence of a military assault on Tartessian soil, no burned fortifications, no mass graves of the kind that accompany conquest. Another hypothesis blames the Earth itself. The southwestern Iberian Peninsula sits in a seismically active zone, and the geological record preserves evidence of major earthquakes and tsunamis in the region. Sebastián Celestino Pérez, the lead archaeologist at Casas del Turuñuelo, has suggested that one or more catastrophic seismic events may have destroyed the coastal settlements, demoralized the population, and driven the survivors inland. The presence of major Tartessian sites in Extremadura, hundreds of miles from the coast, in terrain that is not where a maritime civilization would logically expand, lends weight to this idea. These inland sites look like the architecture of refugees, monumental, ambitious, but displaced. To find these sites in Extremadura means something. One researcher has observed. These people were running from something. And then there is a third possibility, stranger and more unsettling than either of the first two. It is suggested by Casas del Turuñuelo itself. The excavation reveals a building of extraordinary sophistication, with construction methods that predate what was believed possible in the Western Mediterranean at that time. Inside, there was a feast, enormous communal meal served on fine ceramics and bronze vessels. Then came the sacrifice of the animals, dozens of them, including the horses, which were among the most valuable possessions a Tartessian community could own. One archaeologist noted the particular strangeness of this. The people sacrificed their only means of transportation, and then they set the building on fire. Then they buried it, layer upon layer of packed earth, tamped down by human hands, sealing the site as thoroughly as a tomb. Esther Rodriguez Gonzalez, one of the lead researchers, has described the burial as deliberate, ritualistic, with the aim of protecting them from looters and saving them from the passage of time. This was not destruction by an enemy. This was self-inflicted. This was a civilization methodically sealing its own footprint, making offerings to gods who, by every material indication, had stopped answering. The Tartessians at this site did not merely abandon their buildings. They conducted what appears to be a closing ceremony for their culture, a final act of sacred decommissioning performed with the same craftsmanship and ritual precision that characterized the culture at its height. Then they dispersed into the Iberian countryside, and the archaeological record loses them entirely. In 22-3, excavators at Turuñuelo uncovered something no one had seen before. Two ornate stone busts, life-sized, with finely carved details of jewelry and hairstyles, believed to be the first known facial representations of Tartessian figures, possibly goddesses. 3 additional fragmentary busts were also recovered, including one that appears to represent a warrior, identifiable by a preserved section of helmet. These faces, carved from stone roughly 2,500 years ago, were found in sealed pits amid the scattered bones of the sacrificed animals. They are, in a sense, the only Tartessians who ever looked back at us. This is where the deeper unease settles in, because the trail of evidence that Tartessos left behind is both abundant and strangely incomplete. We have their gold, we have their bronze, we have their writing, but we cannot fully read it. We have their building techniques, which astonished researchers who thought such methods arrived centuries later with the Romans. We have their trade networks stretching across the entire Mediterranean. We have accounts from Herodotus and Ephorus and Pausanias and the compilers of the Hebrew Bible, all pointing to the same place, the same wealth, the same sophistication. And we have, at the end, a group of people who gathered together in an inland valley, killed their horses, burned their hall, and buried everything under 14 feet of earth, before walking into a silence from which they never returned. There is no conquest narrative, there is no plague, there is no single catastrophe that accounts for everything. There is only a gradual vanishing, punctuated by one extraordinary act of cultural self-erasure at a site that has not yet been fully excavated, and that, due to a dispute between the landowners and the regional government of Extremadura, is currently inaccessible to the archaeology team that has devoted years to understanding it. The partially uncovered bones and structures sit in the open, vulnerable to weather and time, while the researchers who unearthed them wait. The Guadalquivir still flows where it always has, though its delta has changed shape beyond recognition. The wetlands of Doñana shift with the seasons, holding whatever they hold beneath their surface. 30 kilometers inland from where the old estuary once opened to the Atlantic, there is still a mining town called Tarsus. The name persists, even if its origin has been forgotten by the people who live there. What Tartessos ultimately confronts us with is not a mystery that can be solved with a single key, a lost document, a hidden chamber, a buried city finally unearthed. It is something more disquieting than that. It is the possibility that a civilization can reach a level of wealth, sophistication, and connectivity that should guarantee its survival and still vanish, not through some external cataclysm that overwhelms it, but through a process we cannot fully trace, a series of decisions and pressures and losses that accumulate until the people at the center of it all decide, deliberately, to close the door behind them, to sacrifice what they value most, to bury the evidence with their own hands, to walk away into a landscape that swallows them entirely, leaving behind only gold and bones and stone faces staring upward through the dirt, waiting for someone to dig them out and wonder what happened. No one has answered that question yet. The site at Tirunuelo still holds most of its secrets beneath unexcavated ground. The capital city, if it exists, may lie beneath a national park. The language, carved into 97 stones across the Algarve and Andalusia, resists translation. The trail, the clear, documented, materially verifiable trail of a civilization that traded with half the ancient world, still ends exactly where it ended 2,500 years ago, in silence.